Greetings. After my last podcast, I received an observation and a question from somebody who is following me in this series. And the observation was, on the surface, you seem to be very relaxed and easygoing, yet underneath it, I sensed a real intensity. What is the intensity all about? And I thought that was a very accurate description of me and a very good question. Let me try to answer that question first and foremost through the poet Yeats. I'm going to read you some lines from his poem, The Second Coming, and this is part of what feeds my intensity. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosened upon the world. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are filled with passionate intensity. In particular, it's the line about mere anarchy being loosened upon the world. As I look at life here in America, but also life abroad, it just seems to me that there is so much chaos, and a chaos that really borders on anarchy. So what I'm trying to do in this podcast series, Wrestling with God, is to address the chaos and the potential for anarchy, and to see if I can't help some people find a path to sanity, a path out of the insanity to sanity. So let me start here with a quote from Albert Einstein. The consciousness that created the problem is never the consciousness that can solve the problem. Translation: if we were able of thinking ourselves out of this quagmire that we are in, we would already be thinking our way through it. It's clear to me that something else is needed. Let me say it this way. Think of a man in quicksand, and he is sinking and potentially drowning in the quicksand. Yet he's trying to hold himself up by his hair and pull himself out. It just can't work. And I think that's part of the human condition right now. We're sinking, and again, a chaos of anarchy and divisiveness, and we're drowning in it. And it's like, again, we're trying to pull ourselves up by our hair, and it's not quite working. There's something outside of ourselves. There's something bigger than ourselves that is needed. So let me proceed this way. Many, many years ago, when I was a young man, I had a wonderful meditation teacher who was also a recovering alcoholic. And he would have me meet him at AA meetings, even though I'm not an alcoholic. And afterwards, we'd go out for coffee and we would discuss meditation. And I really enjoyed going to the AA meetings. And I loved to hear the stories of people whose lives had become chaotic and painful because of their alcohol addiction. And then they talked about finding a higher power that helped pull them out of the life of addiction and actually gave them peace and restored them to sanity. And I heard those stories, and they inspired me, and they made so much sense to me. Now, we're living in a day and age where the word God, it seems like many people are allergic to it. So there was something about this concept of a higher power that could restore people to sanity that just really, really spoke to me. Now, if somebody is a materialistic scientist, they're going to say, well, what does that mean, higher power? You can't put it under a microscope. You can't quantify it. You can't measure it. Therefore, it doesn't exist. But the experience of these people, and they're naming this power, this higher power, it is a true phenomenon. It is a true reality that even though it can't be quantified, you can see the results of it. You can see the effects of it. That there's something real in this whole business of a higher power being able to do for us what we can't do for ourselves. And I think that's what the world needs right now. we need a higher intelligence, a higher consciousness to pull us out of this quagmire of divisiveness and chaos and anarchy. So I just want to briefly share with you the first 3 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And again, you don't have to be an alcoholic to relate to it. Personally, most of us have something that we're addicted to or some kind of chaos that's running our lives. So it's a universal message, but it's also something collectively that we can begin to look at as a human race. So the very first step is, came to admit that I was powerless over alcohol and that my life had become unmanageable. So you can exchange that word, powerless over alcohol, for powerless over the insanity of the ego. There are so many, there's this collective ego in the world that just seems to be creating more and more insanity. And it's making our lives unmanageable, individually and again, collectively. And there's something that about just admitting that kind of begins to crack the shell of our psychological defenses. It cracks this wall that we've put around ourselves of self-sufficiency. It cracks that, and even though it's painful to admit that and uncomfortable, in that cracking then, there's the possibility of opening up to something larger than ourselves. But if we don't have that humility to say, yeah, individually and collectively, our lives have become unmanageable, then nothing new can happen. It's not about hating oneself. It's not about shaming oneself. It's just admitting the obvious, that we're in over our heads. The second step is, came to believe that a power greater than us can restore us to sanity. Again, a lot of people are allergic to the word God, so talking about this higher power, this higher consciousness, this higher intelligence speaks to people in a different way. I want to propose to you that there literally is a higher intelligence. I want to read a quote from Jane Goodall, the scientist who has done so much groundbreaking work with chimpanzees. We don't live in only a materialistic world. In every single cell in your body, there is a code of 7 billion instructions. I want to repeat that line. In every single cell in your body, there is a code of 7 billion instructions. Could that be chance? No. There's no actual reason why things should be the way they are, and chance mutations could not possibly lead to the complexity of life on Earth. The blurring between science and religion is happening more and more, and scientists are more willing to talk about it. So think about that. There is a code of 7 billion instructions in each one of our cells that is guiding that cell, directing that cell and its activities to sustain life. And then you think about that the average body has about 32 trillion cells times 7 billion. There's so much intelligence operating in the human body that the brain, we can't even fathom it. And it operates without our specific intervention. So maybe there really is a higher power, a higher consciousness, a higher intelligence that creates life and sustains life in all of its complexities that we have the possibility of tapping into if we could acknowledge that we need it. What if that's true? If it is true, then the implications are revolutionary. All right, the third step of Alcoholics Anonymous. Made a decision to turn our will over to the care of God as we understand God. I want to repeat that. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand God. So let me just try to say, what does that look like, or what might that look like in our day-to-day lives? First of all, it's pushing us, it's moving us to look beyond ourselves, not to some sky god, but to look at realms of higher consciousness, realms of higher intelligence, realms of more subtle beingness that somehow can interact with us. So it's an invitation to go beyond our narrow little worlds. And specifically, one way that we can do that is that we can learn, whether you call it contemplative prayer or you call it meditation, but every day having some sort of practice that takes us out of the flow of chaos and anarchy and really helps to establish us in stillness, in silence, in beingness. And when we are established, or when we touch that silence and stillness, there is literally an intuitive intelligence that begins to bubble up within us. And just from my own experience, I meditate every day. And I have a very active and busy life. And I find in certain situations when I don't quite know what to do, I ask this simple question: what is the most loving and intelligent thing that I can do in this moment? And it's virtually miraculous. Some intuition will arise, some insight will arise, and I know how to navigate through this very difficult situation with grace, with dignity, and with love, and with intelligence. So again, going into that silence, and then as we live our day-to-day lives, pausing, breathing, and just asking the question, what is the most loving and intelligent thing that I can do in this moment? And it's incredible. There's just this magic that arises. And the last thing is childlike, not childish, but childlike. It's just learning to ask the universe, our higher power, God, for help. Help me. Give me the strength. Give me the wisdom to do what I need to do, to know what I need to do. Help me to overcome this. Help me to be more loving. It's just that childlike openness to something that we're connected to, but is simultaneously greater than us. Again, I go back to that Jane Goodall quote. There's so much intelligence within us that keeps our body functioning in an orderly way, and so much intelligence around us in nature that keeps nature functioning and supporting life. When we ask for help, we begin to tap into that benign intelligence, that loving, supportive intelligence, and it will help us to do. It will do for us what we can't do for ourselves. So that's a very simple, inadequate, but hopefully helpful summary of how the first 3 steps of AA work. AA also has 12 promises that I think are wonderful. And one of the 12 promises says that if we practice these steps, we will intuitively know how to handle ourselves in situations that formerly baffled us. We're tapping into a higher intelligence. We're tapping into a higher power that will guide us through all of life's chaos and take us from insanity to sanity. I want to close with a quote from one of my favorite people, one of my spiritual heroes, Dr. Martin Luther King. And it captures perfectly what I'm trying to say in this podcast. And ironically, it's the last speech he gave the night before he died. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it does not matter with me now, because I have been to the mountaintop. He communed with this higher consciousness, this higher power. Like anyone else, I would like to live a long life, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will, and He has allowed me to go to the mountain. And I have looked over, and I have seen the promised land, and I am happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. When we meditate, when we practice these 3 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a way that we're taken to that metaphorical mountaintop, and we see new possibilities for our individual lives and our collective lives. We see a path through the insanity, and that path through is greater than the power of our fear, and it empowers us to live our lives with intelligence, with compassion, with love, and with dignity. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please list them below. Please share this podcast with somebody else. And if you're listening on YouTube, please subscribe. Again, thank you, and I'll see you at the next installment of Wrestling with God. Blessings.